Basically, the developed countries have developed using all kinds of policies that go against free market orthodoxy and that are basically the opposite of what they recommend to or even force upon the developing countries today. Yeah? And I mean, this is what the German economist Friedrich List, who is mistakenly known as the father of infant industry argument, described as kicking away the ladder. He said in 1841, the British tell us the Germans and the Americans to do free trade, but how did the British develop? They develop on the basis of protection and subsidies. This is like kicking away the ladder with which one climbed to the top. I mean, you don't need to read this quote because it's all very neatly summarized in this cartoon, which is the cover of my earlier book. You know, the rewriting of history is so complete, we don't even know that it has been rewritten. Yeah? And then, I mean, it's a bit like this. I mean, I'm sure some of you know some of these guys. This is, of course, Lenin, Trotsky. Prize for someone who can guess what the guy with the specs and mustache is called? No, you'll have to be a connoisseur of Russian Revolution to know it. This guy called Kamenev, who was Trotsky's brother-in-law. He was married to Trotsky's sister and was the editor of, I think, Izvestia, one of the big papers, one of the leading figures in early Russian Revolution politics. And of course, when Stalin came to power, he couldn't let this kind of photo to be seen, so he doctored it and said this was all done by Lenin. Yeah? It's a bit like this. I mean, in the history of capitalism, of course, at the center was the market, but then there was also protection and regulation. But today, you know, they say it has all been done by the market. Huh? You know, I'm not suggesting that there's some sinister committee sitting in the basement of the Pentagon or the IMF, rewriting history. You know, the thing is, history is, first of all, written mostly by the victors, and secondly, that we write, well, think about, interpret, and write about the history from our present vantage point of view. Yeah? When you give this historical evidence, people, well, first of all, tend to kind of refuse to accept it, but even when they accept it, they usually say, yeah, well, maybe those things worked in 19th century Europe, but, you know, didn't the developing countries monumentally screw up when they tried these policies in the 1960s and 70s under the banner of import substitution? Well, yeah, we should look at these facts, and the facts are the following. You know, in the 1960s and 70s, in the bad old days of protectionism and regulation in developing countries, per capita income used to grow at about 3% per year. In the following 20 years, growth rate was basically half, despite the fact that this is a period when the two giants, India and China, started to grow very fast. They, of course, are liberalized, but they didn't embrace the free market, free trade agenda. Yeah? So despite that, growth rate was more or less half, and growth slowdown was more severe in those countries where free market, free trade reform was most diligently applied for various reasons, namely Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa. Yeah? You know, Latin America used to grow at 3.1% in the bad old days. Huh? And then the next 25 years, growth rate fell to 0.5. Yeah? I'm quite happy to take out the 1980s as a decade of adjustment, and on the recognition that some of these adjustment problems had been created by bad policies of the 1970s. But even if you did that, Latin American growth rate in the last 15 years was only about 1.2%, basically 1/3 of what it used to be. Things in Africa have been even worse. Now, of course, I can give these arguments, but, you know, people are usually not very happy to let evidence get in the way of a good argument. So they find all kinds of other reasons. Yeah? You know, when the IMF World Bank structure adjustment program was first introduced in developing countries and produced bad results, they said, oh, we need more time. Yeah, of course you need more time. And then later they had time, and then the result was still not coming out. They said, yeah, well, you know, this is because the countries haven't really implemented these policies, you know, faithfully. Huh? They need to do more. Huh? Okay, so they were made to do more. Huh? It still didn't work, so what do they say now? Instead of saying, well, maybe there's something wrong with our theory, now they say it's the countries that are wrong, not the theory. Huh? They are corrupt, they have bad culture, they have bad geography. Yeah? I mean, you wouldn't believe it, but there are economists making a living out of running statistical analysis, trying to prove that if you are closer to the equator, you grow more slowly. Yeah? Now, apart from all kinds of the other highbrow issues involved in this debate, I mean, what is totally unclear to me is that what the policy implication of all this is, yeah? Because the only thing I can think of is that Uganda should invade Norway and colonize it. Yeah? No, because otherwise, how do you move your country? Yeah? Anyway, so I mean, I deal with some of these things in the book. I have a whole chapter devoted to issues of corruption and other political things, and I have another chapter on the role of culture, provocatively titled Lazy Japanese and Thieving Germans. So, I mean, please take a look at them if you're interested, but I don't have time to go into them. So, all of this, however, gets swept away in real life, if you like, political negotiations. You go to the WTO, you can give them statistical evidence, you can give them historical examples, they'll still say, well, we still need a level playing field. Don't you think it's grossly unfair that the US and Japan have only 3% tariff and India has 33%? Huh? Now, it's very difficult to argue against this idea of level playing field because it sounds like you are in favor of unfair competition. Huh? But I would say that the level playing field is the wrong principle to apply when the players are unequal. Yeah? Suppose in a football game, or what you call soccer in this country, one team is the Brazilian national team and the other team is made up of my 12-year daughter's school friends. I would say it's only fair that the girls attack from up the hill and the Brazilians defend from down the hill. Yeah? Of course, in real life, you don't see this kind of tilted playing field. But then that's not because the idea of tilted playing field is wrong. It's because these unequal players are not even allowed to compete against each other. Yeah? The Brazilians will never be allowed to, well, officially compete against a bunch of 12-year-old girls. Yeah? It's not just the age and the gender. I mean, I gave you an extreme example, but a lot of sports have weight classes. Yeah? Boxing, wrestling, weightlifting, and do you know how fine these classes are? Huh? In the lower weights of boxing, like the flyweight, bantamweight, and so on, the weight bands are basically between 2 and 3 pounds. Yeah? So in boxing, you think that it is so grossly unfair that one guy who is 4 pounds heavier than another guy boxes the light guy. You make it structurally impossible by saying that these people belong to different classes and they cannot fight against each other. Yeah? While in international trade, you think, of course, Honduras should compete on equal terms with the United States. Yeah? I mean, this is the kind of the distorted idea that we have. So what I argue in the book is basically that global economic competition is a game of unequal players. And in this situation, it is only fair that we tilt the playing field by allowing the weaker countries to protect and subsidize their producers more vigorously and do other things that help their development, like more weakly protecting intellectual property rights. And without doing this, you can give all the lip service that you can to economic development, millennium economic development goal, lifting people out of poverty, but we will never be able to allow these countries to genuinely develop.